I'm Steve Goss, and I'm here at the Homenaje Festival in Padua in Italy, talking with Sean Shibe. Tonight, Sean is going to play a programme for the festival, and in his programme he has two fascinating new British works, a work by Harrison Birtwistle and a work by Thomas Addis. Sean, tell us a little bit about these two works, perhaps starting with the Birtwistle.
So the Birtwistle was written in, I suppose it was actually the years preceding 2014, wasn't it? 2014 was the premiere.
It was.
But he'd worked on it with Leithwood since, 2012?
Yes, they've been working on it a while. This is Jonathan Leithwood, was working in collaboration with Julian Bream and Harrison Birtwistle on the piece.
But the person who premiered it was, of course, Andrei Lebedev.
It was, yes.
Played it for the first time in St. John Smith Square. And it does bear the mark of a lot of collaboration. A lot of very specific fingering decisions are made clear in the printed score, but also by comparing it with Andrei's version and Jonathan Leithwood's version, which are not really readily available, but I've scoured various places to find. You can see how actually variable it is, and I think that's something that gives you an impression of the degree of collaboration that resulted in this work. And the Addis is probably somewhere on the other side of the spectrum. I think Tom had a very specific idea of what he wants to do with the instrument and understood what the instrument is capable of as well. So obviously it's a briefer piece, it's about 2 or 3 minutes long, whereas the Birtwistle is I think supposed to be about 17, often a little shorter. But yeah, he had a very specific idea of what he wanted to do, and the collaboration was only with one guitarist resulting in the piece. It's not originally for solo guitar, it's originally for mezzo over the top, but he felt that it really worked well as a solo piece, and I think with a little alteration, it does.
So it's from his opera, The Exterminating Angel, isn't it? It's the opera that's based on the Buñuel film. And there's quite an extensive guitar part throughout the opera, or does it just appear in a small part of the piece?
A couple of points. It's not super extensive. It's hugely challenging, though, for the little points that it takes part in the opera.
Yeah, this is one of the things I think with both these pieces that you're playing tonight is that they're incredibly technically and musically challenging. Tom Addis, a pianist himself and a conductor, even wrote incredibly challenging music for himself to play, and plays it very brilliantly, of course. And Birtwistle's piece is never easy. It's always rhythmically complex and often layered with quite a few dense textures. So the Birtwistle piece does have a number of these multi-layered sections in it. How difficult is it to kind of keep these layers separate, or do they sort of all contribute to a sort of general overall sonority?
I think Addis's musical language is something almost inherently gymnastic, and you're moving from one part of the instrument to a totally different part from note to note. You're very rarely consistently in the same position, whereas in the Birtwistle I think often you are. Sure, there are parts that are less idiomatic than others, but by and large what Addis compresses into 2 or 3 minutes is I think just almost instrument breaking in its virtuosity. It's actually a level of virtuosity that makes the piece unlike anything I've really heard before for the guitar, which is a feat in itself. Whereas Birtwistle somehow, sure, it's intense, and it you're right to say, yeah, it's technically challenging, but somehow it's very intricate contrapuntal writing, and the oscillation of the different compositional machines that he constructs results in something that I think offers points of relaxation. You don't have this condensed intensity. It's something that where you really have to concentrate technically, even if you're always having to be alert mentally for the different devices that are at play.
It's interesting, that idea of some gymnastics in the Addis piece, and the fact he's very much got the instrument to the forefront of his thinking when he's writing for it, clearly visualising what needs to be done with both hands at each point. Whereas Birtwistle's piece seems to the outsider to be a little more abstract, a little more less thinking about strings and fingers and the instrument, and more just about the kinds of chords that he likes to use.
I think you're right, and I think that even on a first glance at both of those scores, that's clear. Addis' writing, in terms of the pitches chosen and the positions that are necessitated through those, are very specific. But I'd say also the sounds that he requires with the right hand are very specific. Each note has often 2 or 3 articulation markings, as well as where to place it in terms of tasto, ponticello, normale. Whereas the bird whistle, I mean, if you look at Andre's version, for instance, it has certain articulation markings that are not present in either of the 2 versions. So clearly there's some adaptation always taking place when Burt Whistle is refining his ideas. Whereas when I was working with Tom Eddes on the Habanero and what compromises or furtherings of certain ideas could take place, he's got a pretty set in stone.
Sure. But is that because he's much more aware of the instrument as a physical object?
I mean, I think he is aware of the instrument as a physical object, but I really got the feeling that actually he decided what he wanted to do there. Yeah,
okay. So it was that clarity of thought.
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting. I was talking to Jonathan about his collaborative work with Burt Whistle on the piece, and there were moments where Bream was suggesting sort of harmonics or doubling notes and so on. And something very profound I thought that Burt Whistle said was, what is the problem we're trying to fix? You know, what's wrong with what we've got? This kind of approach. But then going on a bit, you know, there would be certain textures that either guitarists would try and Burt Whistle would, you know, say, oh yes, I like that, or I like that. But it seems as if the whole process was quite spontaneous and almost kind of random, and that any number of different decisions might have been made on the same day. Whereas what you're saying about the Addis is that his idea was so clear about what he wanted that there wasn't really anything that was up for debate or discussion.
I mean, maybe it's also the nature of the length of the piece as well, right? If you've got a 2-minute piece, you've maybe compressed your thoughts about it quite clearly. There's not quite so much of a grand scope of things to have to deal with at the same time. But it's it's just interesting the way collaboration works, isn't it? I mean, you're saying like, it felt kind of random at certain points, but I guess it's also an organicness to the way that humans interact with one another.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So it's going to be interesting hearing these 2 works against the rest of your program, which is more the kind of standard guitar repertoire. I think you're doing some Barrios, right?
I'm playing some Barrios and some Villalobos. So I think the first half is pretty much music that feels quite classical. I mean, sure, the cycle of 12 etudes by Villalobos moves from something very pointedly classical into something a little bit more organic and untamed and sort of rainforest sounds.
Absolutely.
And I think the second half is something that moves away from that idea of classicism. We were talking about this at lunch, that the way that Tom Addes approaches the guitar is sort of similar to one of his pupils, Francisco Call, who treats it as this sort of like caveman's object, kind of plucked by people in the dark. That is quite far removed from the way that Segovia treated the instrument, right? And I think that in his own way, actually, Burt Whistle sort of conjures a similar idea of something arcane from the instrument.
Yeah, I think also the association of the Burt Whistle with Picasso, and Picasso's idea of the guitar too.
As this similar thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So one last question, I think, before we finish. I'm intrigued to know, as you're playing all 12 Villalobos studies, are you going to do the repeats in the first 3?
Okay, so 2 things to say. Firstly, I'm not actually playing all 12.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm playing 5 of them. So I don't know, that might be something I have to announce. I'm not entirely sure, but I was looking at my itinerary which the agent sent over, and I was like, actually, I mean, well, I definitely haven't learned all 12 for this concert, so I'm going to be playing not all of them. But it may be that in the program also it doesn't include the Barrios, so well, whatever. Anyway, so the repeats in the third one, which I will play, I am doing some of them. So I'll leave that as a surprise. There you go.
Excellent. Well, pleasure talking to you, Sean, as always, and we're all very much looking forward to tonight's concert.
Likewise.
Thanks very much.